According to French philosopher Jean Paul Sartre, our self is not an inherent or fixed entity. Rather, it is a creation that emerges through our interactions with the world. He argues that the ego, or the self, is not consciousness itself, but instead a product of consciousness. Since we are our consciousness, it follows that the ego, or the I, is separate from us. You might ask, if I am not myself, then what am I? According to Sartre, you literally are nothing. We will explore Sartre's reasoning here. Sartre explains the absence of an essential self in his essay Transcendence of the Ego, published in 1939, 4 years before the publication of his tome Being and Nothingness. Being and Nothingness is a dense, almost incomprehensible study of being, at least to me, at times sounding more like experimental literature than a philosophical argument. Transcendence of the Ego is a more straightforward description of the phenomena of the self and its relationship to consciousness. In the essay, Sartre argues that our perception of selfhood is illusionary, and that consciousness is basically a nothingness. One of the things that is interesting to me is that Sartre's claims can be tested by any of us, simply by looking at our own consciousness in its everyday interaction with the world. Following in the footsteps of phenomenologist Edmund Husserl, Sartre uses the technique of simply explaining his experience of the world, specifically, explaining how phenomena in the world appear to his consciousness. In a sense, this is similar to Descartes' project in his Meditations published in 1641, wherein he also describes his personal experience in the world, albeit from a different starting point and for different ends. Descartes wanted to know if there was anything he could know with absolute certainty outside of mathematical truths. Descartes started by doubting everything that he could consistently and logically doubt. He concluded that he could doubt the external world. Technically, it could be a hallucination or a mental construct. Also, he could doubt the details of himself. Again, these details could all be in his mind. However, he recognized that, if he was doubting, he could not doubt that he was doubting. That is, even though the details of himself and his world could be false, if he was thinking of them, then he must be thinking. Therefore, if he is thinking, then he must, in some sense, exist. Hence his famous "I think, therefore I am." This claim is hard to dispute. It seems self-evident that if I am thinking, then I must exist. This brings us back to Sartre. Sartre uses Descartes' claim as a starting point, but questions the essential existence of the I. In the Transcendence of the Ego, Sartre starts by quoting Kant's version of the Cartesian statement. He writes, "It must be conceded to Kant that the I think must be able to accompany all our representations. But need we then conclude that an I in fact inhabits all of our states of consciousness, and actually affects the supreme synthesis of our experience? We should like to show here that the ego is neither formally nor materially in consciousness. It is outside, in the world. It is a being of the world, like the ego of another. The world in this statement is not just the material world around us. What Sartre means by world is that which is outside of the subject of our experience. That is, any object of thought, rather than thought itself, is, quote, in the world. Sartre is claiming that even though an I, or a self, can be found with any act of consciousness, it is not one with consciousness. To illustrate his point, Sartre introduces the concept of the transcendence of the ego. He argues that the ego, or the self, is an object among other objects of thought, rather than being the subject of thought. Just as I perceive a chair or a tree, or envy or a toothache, as objects of thought, I also perceive myself as an object. You can test this yourself, right now. When you think of yourself, or are conscious of yourself, there is the you that is conscious and the self you are conscious of. Any content I associate with myself cannot be grasped in a particular moment. Go ahead. Try it. If you think, I am X, Y, and Z, right when you think it, that thought is a past thought. This is a consequence of existing in time. When trying to grasp the I of experience, consciousness is always thinking of either a future or past self, even if that future or past self is a nanosecond behind the thought or ahead of the thought. The self is always just outside of the subject of our experience. This at first seems paradoxical. I am not I. According to Sartre, this is because we misattribute the ego or the self as the agent of thought or as something inside of consciousness. However, Sartre's assertion raises the question, if myself is not in consciousness, then what is in consciousness that I can assert as being me in a given moment? According to Sartre, there is nothing. I am not a thing. My true essence is simply the act of consciousness, devoid of any content that I can call a self. For example, I could say I am okay at chess, I love my family, and I am selfish at times. Sartre would disagree. He would say that I am not any of those things. I am the consciousness observing these actions and tendencies and associating with the memories of them and theoretical future manifestations of them. Think of it this way, consciousness is an action, not a thing. Or consciousness is a verb, not a noun. In this sense, you are not a thing. You literally are no thing. Earlier we stated that consciousness is always implicitly aware of itself as separate from the content it is conscious of. When we take the content out of immediate experience, we are left with nothing but that separateness. Sartre calls a gap. You are a gap. This gap or void or nothingness is the truth of what we really are. At first, to say one is a nothing might sound frightening. Indeed, Sartre claims that recognizing the nothingness of individual existence creates a sense of angst, which is the dread one feels when confronted with the lack of essential meaning to the self and, by proxy, to existence. However, there is a positive side to this recognition. This angst may serve as a wake-up call to us, to live authentically, and to create our own self, rather than simply identifying with one that manifests to us. According to Sartre, this nothingness is what allows us to escape the tyranny of self and create meaning in our lives, rather than to find a meaning to life. It is the freedom to choose and define our own existence. We do this already. When we choose to identify with the idea of a fixed and unified self, we just don't realize it. Once we admit that it is a choice to be X, Y, or Z, we can choose to be something completely different. Being nothing means that we are pure freedom. Nothing, except perhaps habit or fear, is stopping you from changing the self that you had previously identified with. However, this freedom also comes with a burden of responsibility. Without any predetermined essence or self, we are solely responsible for creating our own values and determining the course of our lives. We cannot blame our choices on anything but our immediate decisions to act this way or that way, because there is nothing to blame them on. We are not bound by any essence or societal expectations or past behaviors. We are free to shape our lives at any given second. With the absence of any fixed essence, we cannot rely on external factors to define our existence. We must take ownership of our choices and actions, recognizing that we are the architects of our own lives.